All right, Michael, introduce, what do we want to talk about today?
Well, I was thinking AI and humanity, but a subset of that, perhaps AI and marketing.
Yeah, which is about the social aspect of
humanity.
I mean,
there's a lot of innovation happening. I saw a stat the other day. Alphabet, Meta, Amazon and Microsoft, those four players have spent in the last 12 months $500 billion Australian, more than $500 billion in Australian dollars.
So they obviously think
AI.
they obviously think this is a thing.
Yeah, I mean, and you look at what's already happening around Meta and Facebook and the way they work, and Google too, the way it works to kind of create a new marketing era, a new way that products and people are encouraged to come together.
So maybe it's worthwhile talking about the traditional way that marketing's done and how that transition is occurring, do you think?
Yeah, that's really probably the starting point. I mean, traditionally you had the 4 Ps, the product, price, place and promotion, and then later they added planning and so on. But those 4 Ps were pre-thought. You came up with a value proposition for your product to a certain audience, and then you pumped out communications through a channel. And that channel could be traditional media, then it obviously came onto social media, but traditional media, radio, print, broadcast, TV, and then people would respond to that message with a call to action which took them into a store or by direct marketing approach online, whatever.
Yeah, that sounds sensible. So how would that change when we incorporate AI into all of that?
Well, what's quite fascinating is the evolution of Google. If I turn the clock back to many years at Microsoft in the late 90s, we were thinking about this new technology called mass customization. And that was about being able to serve up a website custom made to you as distinct to the next person. So it was almost assembled on the fly.
Yeah.
And because of that, it could be database driven. And the more we knew about you, we were able to serve up content which appealed to you. And in fact, perhaps even took you down a path which identified certain things about you by inserting different pages to ascertain your interest. So there was very much this excitement.
Which you couldn't do before?
No, couldn't do any of that before.
Couldn't do any of that.
It was very static. It was just one size fits all, that's it.
So you were doing analysis on thousands of people and just finding a common denominator and just hoping that that would be enough to get your product going.
That's it. It's mass research. It's averaged, and I'm a big critic of averages because they just don't tell you the nuance behind. Everyone's slightly different. You've got 16 personality types. You've got a whole lot of stuff going on. Yeah. So yeah, it's not that relevant. Yeah.
Well, when you think about, Taleb talks about this in his book. Is it The Black Swan or Randomness? The Fooled by Randomness. He talks about our mind works in the world of, I can't remember what his language is, but of mediocrity, right? Our mind works there. We can't see extremities, right? We only see, we think this Gaussian, beautiful Gaussian normal distribution. But he goes, everything, in fact, most social things live in these fat tails that we're not wired to think about. And engineering is big like that as well. Like people always say to me, oh, Damien, you're over-engineering everything. It's like, yeah, that's because we're not wired to think about these extremities, and that's where we live. We live in the extremes. We live in the earthquake world. We live in the hurricane world. We live in the cyclone world. Like that's where we live. So as a normal person, there are probability heuristics as well. That's Daniel Kahneman, I think. It's like we only see this middle ground. So that's where that's where all your marketing is in this mediocre world.
Well, it's fascinating. You talk about the tails because what Google did when they brought that to life is they didn't do it on the basis of one organisation assembling all its own data about customers and then serving up very customised one-on-one experiences for the internet and engagement with that company. They did it on the basis of everyone. So they created this search engine and they said, well, how do we find out the most about you such that we can serve you up the right ad and you become monetised? Yeah. And my understanding is they'll do that across, people use Gmail, they put an attachment on Gmail. All of that is read and classified algorithmically. And so that's going on in the background with machine learning, a subset of AI, in order to classify you and your interests such that products can be brought to your attention.
Yeah, but when you think about it, we weren't capable of doing that previously because we didn't have the software to do it. Yeah. But now we have the software to do it. Like everyone has their own phones, for example. You're not sharing, I don't share my phone with anyone. right? So, of course, everything that's on my phone, if I say Mountain Dew now, I'm probably going to get a Mountain Dew ad on my Instagram feed, right? But we didn't have that. We didn't have those personal devices previously that would allow us to do that personalized marketing.
Well, yeah, I guess you had the PC, went through the PC era, which is kind of now, I hate to say it, but is it drawing to its close? And we're now moving to personal devices. But, the desktop PC was the go-to for collecting all of that. But I mean, a couple of points in there that you make, which is that when Meta came on the scene and they said, okay, let's create this socialness in the sense of basically rabbit holes. I won't use the word echo chambers, but rabbit holes of interest. So you're able to have like minds coming together out of their interest based on what they've explored in the Facebook world. You're currently being curated down this rabbit hole of interest with like-minded people. And that gets really, really interesting.
Right, groupthink.
Groupthink.
Or biases.
Referential enforcement.
Yeah.
Let me put that name to it.
Right.
We're engineering influence here, right?
Right.
We're going about...
So we can't help but hang out with people who agree with us.
Absolutely. And you're going to feel great. And they're going to feel great, right?
I thought I was feeling better nowadays than I have been.
The more time you spend on Facebook, the better you're going to feel about yourself and your friends.
That's right.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So the danger to me, though, is that who's in charge of this? And this is really the thematic of our overall theme, AI versus humanity. It's like, it's not necessarily us aware of what's happening and choosing friends and so on. There's an invisible hand of curation behind that.
So do you think that we should purposely follow people that disagree with us so that we can break it down? Oh my goodness.
That gets interesting, doesn't it? You know, go down a different rabbit hole, confuse the algorithm. Now what?
Yeah, and what's Google going to think of me then?
It's fascinating. There's a really good film called The Social Dilemma, which I encourage everyone to watch. It just goes into all of the detail of how this works. And technically, to my view, is probably highly accurate. I don't know, I haven't programmed and worked on those social sites, but that's where it gets really interesting. And the problem becomes when you've got this dopamine connection, right? People have this preemptive expectation. For example, if you scroll down on your socials, there'll be a very short pause before an image might appear. And the timing of that pause has been absolutely curated with machine learning millions of times to get it exactly right to get your attention. And the reason they do that is because when you talk to a neuroscientist, I had the benefit of interviewing a neuroscientist once, and she spoke about the paths to the reptilian brain where you'll act without thinking, without cognition, and those paths are tension and urgency. So this scroll effect will create some tension of, what's it I'm about to see? Is this good, bad, or whatever? And that'll...
So it's a pause before it shows
Correct.
you what it wants to show you.
Yeah.
Because that creates the tension. And what's the urgency? So how does that translate to urgency?
Well, not sure it does in that environment.
Yep.
I think it can come from other environments,
Yep.
but it's at least half of the equation.
Yep.
And the kind of addictiveness of dopamine hits when you're about to see something. Oh, it's that, or it's my friend's latest thing, or it's this ideal world that is idealised and not anything like my world, and therefore I'm not feeling so good about myself anymore. And they show, there's some research which is really interesting in teens as to their kind of level of satisfaction with the world, their level of confidence, their level of anxiety, which, and particularly female, is very, very high in those teen years, that kind of 12 to 16 bracket of development, because they're now starting to link it to some of these socials.
Right. So they're feeling... Are they feeling comfortable or uncomfortable, or how
Uncomfortable.
are they?
Their life is not as good as someone else's life that's shown here in these wonderful Instagrammable moments.
Yeah, but isn't that a criticism of Instagram and the fact that it only shows highlights from people's lives rather than what people really deal with?
Well, this comes back to the whole thing. It's people that are training the AI. AI is being trained, it's grazing across all of this data, all of the YouTube data, everything, to learn how we are, and then it's just replicating that in a probabilistic way.
Yeah.
So maybe it's how people use it as an argument.
Well, it's curated. I mean, the whole thing is curated, like people's lives are curated.
That's
so to show, because you're not going to show an episode when you're down in the dumps, are you?
No,
you're going to show an episode where you're happy and content.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, yeah, and I think that connects to this kind of world of developing a me-centric world. It's a marketing thing too that says that you are important, you are it, and people have my truth, right? It's all about their truth, so they're telling their story, and what is true anymore? This misinformation, disinformation thing is kind of meandering through, and governments now looking at regulating and so on, which will be quite fascinating to see.
Well, that goes to my theory as well about the fact that the same people going through the same thing can experience it very differently, right? You come out of something and you go, oh, that was a success, and while the other person's saying, oh, that was a failure, right? It's like, how do you interpret what's going on, and how do you process all of that information? I know there's some stories about in a childcare center where you just give the kids random things and they kind of make a mess, and they're kind of having fun and they make a mess, and one of the carers says, oh, well, that was a failure, and the other one goes, no way, that was a complete success. Yeah. Like, I'm sure that's happy, but it's all to do with you and how you perceive things and how you perceive joy or success, or what success looks like, or what it is, what outcome do you really want? And thinking about everyone's truth is different. Surely. Yeah. Doesn't that go back to the fundamental thing about the only thing we know is true is I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
Right?
That's it.
Everything else could be AI, could be a figment of our imagination.
Yeah. It could be, and then is it engineered? Is the point that I'm kind of getting to. So just as you'd engineer something and design it for a specific purpose.
Yes.
You would understand that purpose deeply, right? I may not in my scenario, or the client wouldn't. Now, if this information's being curated, if what I'm seeing is being curated and shaped, and I'm not at all aware of that and where that's taking me, perhaps that's taking me to a nefarious purpose. Perhaps that's taking me to sale of a product, right? Which is often the case. So my attention is the commodity. We're now in this new context of an attention economy, what I'd call an influence economy, a reaction economy. It's all leading to where does this influence go? How's it being used?
Are you saying that we're losing control over our own formations of ideas and values, right? So in other words, what I hold dear to me right now, is that something that I've controlled, or is that something that's been controlled?
And that's it. I think that's the core of it. Because when you're losing...
Isn't that the fundamental thing about marketing?
Well, yes, it can be. I don't know if that's good marketing, but that's a whole ethical debate.
I want you to believe that my product, surely that is. I want you to believe that my product can bring you happiness, or whatever it is.
So here's the problem with that, is that you get on a consumerist kind of, what I call a spiral, that kind of spirals down, and you start to lose what it is about the definition of meaning, right? Because when you talk about values drive the why and they shape the how, but they're not a destination in themselves, right? You've got choice. And arguably, happiness is about being deliberate and human on the where and your destination of where you're going, right? So what we're talking about here is potentially that process being hijacked, arguably in nefarious ways, but maybe, as you say, that's okay, we're showing it, and it's laddering up to meaning. So that meaning is kind of being drained as you work down this spiral.
I suppose that feeds into the concept of things becoming normalized, right?
Yeah.
So I know in art industry, in the construction industry, variations have been normalized, right? You have a 20% contingency on your build, and you will almost certainly use it. That's normalized. And if a project, people who use that 20% contingency, they say, oh, my project was a success. And it's like, but you use your 20% contingency, right? And that's because, but everyone does. Yeah. It's like, well, you don't have to. Yeah. Like there is a better way to do it, so that isn't normal, right? Yeah. And then when people don't use it, you say, we're not going to use the contingency, we don't need to, there's no variations or whatever. It's like, okay, well, that was a success too. It's like, but you don't realize that it's not normal not to use the, like we normalize everything. So in a way, we're being controlled in that way too, because we're just normalizing that.
Yeah, by the social reference around us, which then in turn goes back to cave theory. It's kind of like if you don't get on with those people around you and you form and form your tribe, then you're not invited into the cave. You don't get to eat tonight. You're out in the rain and you're hungry. So there's this kind of natural sort of social cohesion that we're seeking and connection that we're seeking to avoid that scenario, which is programmed from dot. Now, have we evolved beyond that? Have we evolved to the sophistication of information that's just spraying at us all the time and overloading us with all these messages? No way. I'd argue our brain's not there yet.
Yeah, but don't you think, let's think about this. So don't you think that the cave theory is even more prevalent now than it has been in the past? Because of social media?
I think
we need to fit in.
I think the aspiration is more prevalent. Yeah, absolutely.
The aspiration to fit in.
To fit in, yeah, to keep up, to look a certain way, to live in a
because we're being fed shit all the time.
Well, you're being fed socially referenced content which says, I'm not good enough unless I am at this level of parity. Or I'm lacking in some way and I need to make up for it.
Yeah, maybe that hasn't changed though.
Maybe it hasn't. But I'd argue that gap is anxiety. The gap between where I am and where I see I should be creates and fosters and builds anxiety, which is not a good emotion.
So you want to, so you want to avoid that emotion so that you can...
Well, put it this way, maybe it's, I want to know that it's being created so that I can help understand it and manage it. In people, in myself, in my kids, and so on.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think the tension. I think that anxiety, which relates back to the tension, it's tension. Like somebody corrected me the other day and said you shouldn't use the word tension because it has negative connotations to it, and I was using it in a positive connotation way. Like in a design environment, you don't want groupthink, right? You don't want people. You don't want people converging on a solution too quickly, right? Because then you're kind of thinking, well, are we really thinking about this in a right way, right? So I said in that environment, you want to create tension so that you diverge only to converge again, so that you're exploring all the different options. So they said Damien, you need to think about a different word than tension. Tension's not the right word, but that is what you want. You want people to be disrupted from the norms, right?
I'm going to take that into another space, which is I call ambiguity. Live in ambiguity. What a delicious ambiguity for a little while.
That's tension as well.
Because of that tension, it's like, well, I'm not sure. And some people are very uncertain about that, very nervous.
Yeah, well, it's like that client who said to me, I said, I'm going to explore 4 different options here to see, and kind of discover what we want to do. And they turned to me and said, no, Damien, just do the right one.
It's like, how do you know it's right?
I know it's right.
And what's right?
That's right. But they didn't. Obviously, that's the dissonance, right? They didn't want to live in this ambiguous world where it's like, and they looked at me as the bloody expert as well. And it's like, I hate that word, expert.
You tell me what's right.
You like, why do you have to explore? Don't you know? Can't you just look at it and like know what's right?
Well, see, this is the point. Right is contextual, isn't it? Right's contextual to that person's needs, which you need to understand fully, which is the whole discussion and ambiguity around that, right?
And I knew nothing. I knew nothing about the project. So how am I supposed to know what the right solution is? And I mean, do we want to go down the expert path? Because I think that's a real problem as well in thinking about the fact that if you are labeled as an expert, that's not the right thing to think about, because it opens you up to, I've got all the right answers and there's nothing about me that needs to change, because I will forever know, because I'm an expert here, I will forever know what the answer is. And the world's not like that.
Well, it's an omnipotent position, isn't it?
Yep. That's right.
Well, and in some ways, the IT is positioned as a deity, right? Now it's like, just ChatGPT told me.
Yeah, AI is like,
it's right.
That's right, it's right.
Yeah.
But we know
that's dangerous.
Yeah, we know that's not this. We know that's
so
not
what
the
are
case.
the antidotes? That brings you to that point of, what do you bring your kids up thinking? How do you approach it yourself to know when this is in danger of being skewed or whatever?
Well, there's 2 things probably more than two things, but two things that immediately come to mind is setting up the idea of curiosity, right? And getting them to question the status quo, right? So I think with curiosity comes that inquisition, right? And then these like, oh, like I get it all the time. Oh, but Damien, I've been doing this for 30 years. It's like, well, you've been doing it wrong. Or like, that might have been appropriate 30 years ago, but it's not appropriate now. When people throw that at me, it's like, that is an absolute gold mine for me. It's like, well, why have you been doing that for 30 years? And times have changed. So, you know, like we shouldn't really be we should never have done that, right? And you've been doing it for 30 years. And I think, you know, not only have times changed, but probably it was the wrong thing to start with, right? Because the world is dynamic.
Oh yeah, and to your point, that's what's going to make that expertise need to move on constully.
Correct.
Otherwise, it's not an expert. So it's an expert for a fraction of a second, but it isn't really going to match.
Or your expertise could be the fact that you never know everything.
Yeah.
Which could be another part of the.
And in a social context, bringing teams and people together that can solve those things is what's really powerful. And you had some thoughts there. I remember speaking about bringing teams together and involving yourself, you coming into a team and influencing that team.
Yeah, so my theory about that is that when you put a team together to do a design, right, the solution there is a unique synthesis, that's Sarah Harvey, unique synthesis of that group, right? And actually, it's even more than that. It's a unique synthesis of that group at that point in time, right? And it takes a path that is unique to them, right? And I think if you bring an outsider in, which is often what I'm asked to do, I'm asked to come in and do a peer review of this group. I'm very delicate about that because even if I say that's not where I would have landed on this, I've got to be cognizant of the fact that if I throw something in there, right, I could totally disrupt the synthesis, and you could carry it. The team, even when I walk away, they could carry it forever and going, remember this thing that Damien said? Like, we're still carrying that. Like, is it relevant anymore? And then the idea is that if I did throw it in, and 2 years later when the project's built, and I see where did my thing go that I mentioned? It's like, what am I thinking about that? Like,
or worse, it got built, and you go, that wasn't it. That was what I meant.
It was just a suggestion. Like, so you got to be careful.
You did all this extra work, and it was only just we were working to that.
So I think you've got to be you've got to form that team correctly, and then you've got to work with that team and make sure that everyone's, because it's all about buy-in, right? And I think the methodology that we build is quite dysfunctional at the moment because we do design, then we tender, then we build. That's the traditional way that we do. And see what I've done there? I brought the builder in after the design is complete. Right? They don't have buy-in in that process. They don't know what the process. They basically got to spend 4 weeks in their tender process discovering what we discovered in 4 years, right, to get to the design point. And so I actually think that's the wrong way to do design.
How many people have worked with plans and the builder rolls them out and go, why the hell would they do that?
Correct.
It's like, I can't build that.
That's right. Or I wouldn't do that, or that's not my expertise.
Right. So it's this iterative process as the ideal of actually, plan, do, review, refine, and just keep looping around.
Correct.
Until you get that. But as you say, involving the right actors and stakeholders to bring into bear that process. It's interesting you mentioned that on teams because I remember reading back in the Empire State Building, which of course was a steel construction building, and they had all of these crews of crane people that would go up every day, and crews of, I think it was 6 people in those crews, and if one of those people was sick, the whole crew didn't go up that day.
Right.
They were so reliant on that unique synthesis, working together and being able to know that fella next to me is going to know what I do. When I pass this across, it's not going to drop to, or fall on some or whatever. So
that's not about efficiency necessarily, but about safety, and probably maybe more about safety. I don't know. Or is it about efficiency, or is it even losing that one day is better than going up there being disrupted?
Yeah, exactly. It is that point, I think, of disruption and interdependency, that connection thing there. But I wanted to circle back to that antidote piece because you mentioned something about curiosity, and I'm going to add to that because that curiosity as a kind of force for understanding, a force to push through and to innovate, I think is wrapped in something called critical thought. critical thinking to me is an antidote to a whole bunch of stuff. It's an antidote to marketing, to propaganda, to the status quo. And as you say, people bring their experience, we've done it this way 30 years, you know.
Yeah.
That critical thought can cut through and evolve that.
Yeah. Well, isn't journalism that? Journalism is about... I know, are you into journalism at all? Do you know anything about journalism?
I know a little bit about journalism.
Yeah. But isn't that a good journalist is the one who looks at the thing, see what people are thinking, and go, why are you thinking that particular thing?
Yep.
Rather than there's something else going, and there's always something else going on, right? There's always agendas. Like we see that all the time. I actually think part of our job is looking around the room and seeing who holds the cards. That's being savvy, right?
Yep.
Who holds the cards? Who should I be talking to? Who should I negotiate with? Who's actually the one who's driving these things? And I mean, the beautiful scenario, and I have been in a couple of these, beautiful scenarios when you're in a room where there's no egos. I think Pixar talks about this a lot, where you're in a room where there's no egos, everyone's contributing, and it's an improv.
Yeah.
It's an improv, right? Rules about improv are don't say no. It's and but, or it's keeping the conversation open, right, and keeping it flowing. That improvisation about information, rather than just no, we can't do that. Which is often what you get, or we will do this.
So that improv's a really interesting point, because if you circle back to the AI, and I've got an example in a moment, and you talk about how AI can improvise, I'm going to put that in inverted commas, probabilistically, not deterministically, by grabbing a whole lot of information it's been trained on and then reassembling it in another way.
Yes.
Right, and what I'm going to show is a short video by the Sora initiative, which lives under OpenAI, and they've done that with video, and they've grazed off a whole heap of videos and connected that to some text prompts so you can start to talk about and instruct it to what you want to see. For example, I want to see some puppies playing excitedly in snow, and I want to see how that they can be presented. And let me show something on that right now. So here we've got the dogs. This is all AI, right? Here they are playing. We've got fluffy snow on their nose. They're looking straight to camera. He's reaching out with his paw. If you watch the paws very closely, they kind of don't quite cross over, but that's okay. And it's photorealistic. And to me, it's kind of like a little bit dangerous, because there's two sides to this story. One is that it's dangerous because it takes people down an engineered emotion path that they could be manipulated to, insert product here, right? And then to be used to build some kind of brand association that's very warm and friendly. And by the way, those things are tracked and optimized till the nth degree so that we can bring you to purchase some product. But that may not be a very kind of transparent use of the AI. What's very interesting is that they quote people on the Sora site that are creatives, that are working with this technology, that potentially stands to bear some, you would think at face value, some loss of work, because I can do it myself. Why do I need these creatives at this agency doing this wonderful advertising for me? I'll just plug it in. And they say that Sora isn't about replicating the old. It brings to life new and impossible ideas, or it's a new era of abstract expressionism, giving us the ability to make the totally surreal. That was a Canadian organisation saying that. So, there's 2 points of view here, isn't there, on where the AI could go. But I guess the point, coming back to the humanity aspect, is we still need to control it. We don't necessarily want it controlling us. And that's the point for debate.